Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. This week we have a bonus episode to our Dr. Phibes retrospective with House of Wax, starring Vincent Price. Now bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars and co-creator of the comics Psycom from Tokyopop and Clockworks from Humanoids. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, writer for Rockabilly Online and creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man from Monsterverse Comics. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Hello. And finally, as always, joining us from Denver, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Buonasera.
Buonasera. Okay. According to Wikipedia, this is going to be two pairs. This is the longest Wikipedia thing I've ever read on the show. House of Wax. House of Wax is a 1953 American 3D horror film about a disfigured sculptor who repopulates his destroyed wax museum by murdering people and using their wax-coated corpses as displays. It stars Vincent Price and was directed by Andre de Toth. It is a remake, incidentally, of a 1933 film, Mystery of the Wax Museum, without the comic relief featured in the earlier film. It has been
the Mystery of the Wax Museum is actually very different in a lot of respects.
I would be very interested. I was wanting to poll everybody and see who's seen it. You've seen it. I have not seen it. Anybody else seen Mystery in the Wax Museum?
Nope.
Man, we got to do a wax museum retrospective. All right. House of Wax was the first color 3D film from a major American studio and has been deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress and selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. So if nuclear winter comes, Vincent Price will still be there terrorizing people in the House of Wax. So let's get our opening thoughts on this, I don't know how best to put it, Hollywood horror in the finest sense. Drew, House of Wax.
I love this movie. It is a definite rival for Dr. Phibes as far as being my favorite Vincent Price movie. I think it's a good, it's sort of proto-Phibes in a lot of ways. Like I feel like that there's a certain thematic similarity between the two characters that he portrays in both of those films. And aside from that, it's just a beautiful looking movie. I love this particular time period a lot, and I don't just mean the time period portrayed in the gaslight horror that's in the film. I love horror films from the early 50s a lot, and this has that great Technicolor pop to it that we like about a lot of the early Hammers as well. And Vincent Price in top form here. It's also got a really good supporting cast, including a very young Charles Bronson as Igor, and just a fun movie. Well, also kind of, there's still stuff like this, and I've seen it so many times that now I think some of the times this was lost on me. But for the time period, there's some pretty gruesome stuff in here when you think about what it was, what had preceded it, and I love that about it. So I think it's kind of also a predecessor of later slasher movies in some ways.
Outstanding. Thank you very much for kicking us off. And I think you also teed up a question as I turn to Tony for first thoughts. Where does this lie in your Vincent Price, deck of cards? I mean, would this be the highest point, or is it somewhere in the middle, or how does it read?
For me, I like it all right. It doesn't blow me away like Drew. I like Phibes a lot, and I don't know. I thought it was good, and I like a lot of bits of it, but I wasn't. It's been a really, really long time since I've seen it. I'm not totally blown away. That doesn't mean it's bad, but something about it, I don't know, didn't click with me as much as other movies. So, I don't know.
weird because I like a lot of the pieces of it, and I think Vincent Price is awesome. I don't know why it didn't really stand out as oh man, I'm going to watch this a bunch more times.
Outstanding. All right, Julia, where do you fall in all that?
I love this movie. I thought it was so good. I actually liked it more than Fibes. I always had a soft spot in my heart for Vincent Price because my dad and I watched him, and my dad always has liked him a lot. So, in fact, I was just talking to my dad about this little retrospective that we've got going. Anyway, I think it's a lot of fun. I agree with Drew that the 50s time period is great, and also I really like this turn of the century time that it's taking place in. I just thought the wax stuff was great. I love it. I mean, it's done so cheaply. It was done for I don't know how much that would be in today's dollars, but it's just over $600,000 that they did it in 33 days. So it's really incredible when you consider that they managed to accomplish what they did. And it's scary at some time. It's very suspenseful. It's pretty to look at. Oh, and then we didn't see it in 3D, of course, but it was in 3D originally, and so that you could see kind of, some different things that they were trying to do, different tricks.
I have seen this movie in 3D, and it is wonderful in 3D.
How did you accomplish that? How did you see
I would love to do that.
I saw it at the Lakewood in Dallas when I lived there. They used to run old horror movies a lot. And, this was one of them. They actually did it for a Valentine's Day special. One year they did this, and oddly enough, Friday the 13th part 3D. So
nice double feature. That's great. In fact, one of our topics, as soon as we get wrapped with the opening thoughts, is we're going to go into 3D. So I am in love with Technicolor horror movies. So I really enjoyed this picture, even though there is no way it never really rises. I never escape the feeling that I'm watching a Hollywood horror film. In other words, it's got this great color. It's got these beautiful, Warner backlot sets. It's exactly the time period of a lot of, really great romance movies and musical comedies and horror films and all kinds of stuff. I think there's also a Phantom of the Opera that's set in this period. I mean, that's filmed in this period, and has the same sort of. At this period, there's almost no downers. Even grim horror films carry sort of a lightweight, jokey attitude all the way through. And we talk all the time about horror comedy, and I always say, oh, this is too broad, or I don't like that, too many pratfalls. This I really like. I like the level of humor in here, but it's just sort of constant and happy. This is a horror movie where lots of people are getting murdered, and yet it puts you in such a great mood. So it's sort of funny. And we'll talk about Vincent Price in a sec. So, okay, this is a 3D movie, and let's talk a little bit about what your experiences with 3D are. Has anybody been? Who here has not been to a 3D movie
Is that even possible in this day and age? Because they release almost everything. They could do. I don't know, people, two people smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee in 3D.
Well, that's true. Okay, I should have said before the recent resurgence that happened as of 5 years ago. But I've actually reached the point now where new movie comes out, Iron Man comes out, and it's in 3D, right? I won't bother going to see it in 3D. It just doesn't do anything for me, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm perfectly happy. Our screens are so huge now. The theaters are so deep. I almost don't get an extra bump out of the movie actually being in 3D off of just being in sort of beautiful looking 2D. Everybody said I should see the new Star Trek movie in 3D, and maybe that would have made a difference.
I think the specialness of 3D has kind of worn off a little bit. But that said, I saw when they released Jurassic Park in 3D, I saw that with my wife, and that was incredible. And it was just so much fun and so scary and awesome in 3D. So
I don't even remember the more recent things I've seen in 3D, which are quite a few. But I remember seeing Jaws 3 in 3D, when I was 12 or however old I was at that point. And that I just remember the like the floating arm right in front of your face and stuff.
That whole period where all of a sudden Jaws came out. Jaws 3 was in 3D. Friday the 13th 3 was in 3D. Amityville 3 was in 3D. All right around the same period, and you had these polarized glasses. And I recognize, by the way, that in the 50s they had polarized rather than the red and green glasses as well. But the technique was looking really good, so that you could, but still, having said that, it always kind of was just sort of a flash in the pan where you'd go to a film and it would have a couple of effects. The most vivid effect I remember from Amityville 3D, believe it or not, was just the realtor's sign flapping back and forth in the rain in front of a house. That literally is the most vivid memory I have of the 3D in that. And I mean, at least Jason gave you that harpoon. I think there's an eyeball, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Friday the 13th 3 is still probably my favorite 3D movie, or at least up there.
Yeah.
Just because of it's Friday the 13th, and I think it's my favorite Friday the 13th movie as well. But I definitely have I've seen it several times in 3D now, thanks to the Draft House, and it's good every time.
But now we're in an era where basically, you're right. Everything now is in 3D. I mean, it's not a novelty anymore. It's now just part of the way that prestige films are released.
Well, Dredd, the new Judge Dredd movie, and what I count as the only one, is part of getting it made was predicated on the fact that they would shoot it in 3D. Like, it would not have gotten made. That was what they said. Okay, well, if you shoot it in 3D, we'll help fund it.
Interesting.
When it's done well, it's like you're always saying, Tony, there's always room for a good thing, good version of
good
something.
anything, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that. I think they used the 3D really well in that movie, too. That was really good.
This movie, because 3D definitely was a novelty at the time, there's whole sequences in the film that are just to show off the 3D. And, your mileage may vary as a modern, film goer. Like, I'm just delighted by that stuff. Like, I think it's really entertaining. Like, I even enjoy it when I'm not seeing it in 3D, which is the majority of the time I've seen the film. But, I know a lot of my friends over the periods of time that I've shown people this movie have said that they thought that was obnoxious.
Well, but you get a lot of perspective shots. I mean, the funny thing is, the fact that they're trying to build in 3D means that they spend a lot of time going, if we have her, there's a point where Vincent Price is stalking a woman through the streets of New York, and, it's just the two of them on these foggy, wet streets. And there's a point where she hides behind a corner, and she's in the foreground, and he's looking for the background. And I realized that they did that to take advantage of the depth. But at the same time, even without the 3D, it looks like a nicely composed shot because.
Well, that's like some of the best looking gaslight horror you could ask for. I mean, that whole sequence is still really effective and creepy. I think. Again, we're talking about Dr. Fives. Like, I think, Price and his melted face look, is mute and kind of stalking definitely is somewhere on the evolutionary chain towards becoming Dr. Fives.
There is a great similarity to Dr. Fives. We should talk about that. So.
Well, yeah, you should talk about the plot a little bit more.
Okay, so just to explain, and then we can talk about the similarities here. So what this film opens with a fire. It opens with the fact that you've got Vincent Price.
Well, it opens before the fire.
Well, that was a sort of a flourish. I should tell you about these things beforehand. It opens with a fire. With Vincent Price is an artist.
This is how all Jason's stories go, by the way. He says something, and I go, well.
21 years, folks. Vincent Price is a rather dashing artist, and he runs this historical wax museum, and he ain't going to sell out because he's punk rock like that. He's got these perfect historical sort of life-size dioramas going, and his partner wants his money out of the place because they're losing money, and he sets fire to the joint and wants to get Price involved in ripping off the insurance company, but
they're losing money because they're not doing sensationalistic, like they don't have a chamber of horrors.
Exactly. Vincent Price is a purist, and he wants to do an educational wax museum. Anyway, so his partner sets fire to the place and attempts to kill Vincent Price, and Vincent Price appears to die in the bombing, in the fire. And then he returns shortly thereafter, and the rest of the film, and we can go into different sequences, but the rest of the film involves he returns to the public as himself, opening up a much more garish museum that's going to make lots of money, because he's going to do true crime and actually do wax figures of crimes that have just been committed. So it'll be like, it'll be like a TV movie of the week except for it's $18.99, of course, but where a crime will be committed this weekend, he'll read about it, and before they can even do much else, in the news, he'll have created a waxwork of it. At least that's the gimmick. But actually, he's also bent on revenge and a few other artistic crazy things.
Well, he murders the partner in a pretty elaborate. He strangles him and then hangs him. And again, that's pretty rough stuff for 1953.
Yeah, no, you're right. He dumps him down an elevator shaft, and so his neck catches on the rope. I mean, and by the way, the character, once he comes back.
I thought he strangled him first, and then he. Oh, is that what you said?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's what I said.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, what's interesting when he returns as the burnt figure of himself, he's dressed like the Hooded Claw, basically, which the character from the old Penelope Pit Stop. He's got a great big hat, he's got a huge cloak, he's got black gloves, and he has what I would only call MacGyver powers with rope. Basically, he can do anything when it comes to rope. He can tie up bodies, and he can hoist them over walls. He can do all kinds of cantilever tricks, for himself, and also hanging people or whatever. He is a genius with that. And the rest of the film involves a cat and mouse game where he is killing people and also trying to find the right face for some of his works of art, and at the same time the police are closing in on him, and the forces of good are represented by this sort of young and beautiful couple. So that's it in a nutshell, because we can get into the particular sequences, but that's the basic concept. Is you've got Vincent Price back, and so you're right. There's a lot of similarities here to Dr. Fives. Not least of which is, Julia, would you like to explain what the heck is going on with Vincent Price's face in this movie?
Well, it's interesting because so he gets trapped in the fire, or he runs into a room that's on fire, and then we see from outside that the place explodes. So presumably he's died, but then it turns out that he's got this horrible disfigurement, but because he's magical with wax, he's created this wax mask of himself that looks just like Vincent Price, which is, a little bit too realistic, especially given that it's smaller than the actual face that he has when he's all distorted and his nose is completely wrong. But anyway, he's got this mask, and and he's pretending when he's Jared that he is in a wheelchair. He's confined to a wheelchair, and of course he's not. He's actually able to walk and use his hands, even though they are in fact disfigured. So throughout the film, he goes back and forth as he murders people with his disfigured face, and then he hosts people in his museum with his Vincent Price face until the end when he's do you want me to skip to the end, or should we?
Well, I just wanted to mention that the explaining exactly what you said, that his face is all burnt, And that's when he's
it's
stalking
burnt.
people.
It's like monstrous.
Yeah, and when he's stalking people in the streets, that's what he looks like. But when he's in the actual museum greeting his customers, he's in a wheelchair, so he's affected the inability to walk. His hands are not useful for sculpting anymore, and that seems to be the truth. But he's also created a false face for himself, and that is very, very Fives. You know, and it's an amazing face because he can talk with it. You know, unlike in Fives where they had the, you know, kind of logical conceit that he had a false face and he couldn't move it. In this case, you know, it's like he's, you know, this guy's a genius. He's created a wax face that literally can do everything his original face.
But then can I talk about the end?
Sure.
Okay. So when he's facing off with his last would-be victim, she hits him in the face, and the face breaks off in these big chunks of wax, which is, I mean, not realistic given that the wax is so pliable when he's moving around, but suddenly it's hard when she hits him. But it's really cool effect. I mean, I just loved watching it all just like shatter, and suddenly he's this deformed monster. It was really great.
Maybe it's like the Batwing stuff that Batman has.
Yeah, maybe.
In The Dark Knight, you know, how depending on what kind of electrical charge is going through it, it can be stiff or pliable at various times. And maybe when he's fighting, his face hardened up, and so when she struck it, you know, this is a true
he probably has to reapply it.
Yes. I
like
mean,
this is, yeah, like it probably you're probably right. It probably does become less fun.
That's the last time we see him with it, so he doesn't reapply it.
Yeah. Well, no, but I'm saying he obviously, you know, takes it off to go murder people, put it back on. I imagine it doesn't stay as pliable over a period of time. It probably hardens up, and eventually he has to do it. You know, we talked about very briefly about Mystery of the Wax Museum. That is one thing that is incredibly similar is Lionel Atwill in that the way they stylize him in that movie and the way they stylize Vincent Price is almost identical. You know, they have the same beard, and even when they're feigning being in the wheelchair, you know, it has the same two crutches in the back, like in the exact same position. So at that point, in that respect, like the this as a remake is very faithful, but in many respects, it's just its own. It's its own thing. I mean, it doesn't even have the same title.
I'm inclined to watch it. Well, there's another one that I've seen from the '60s, and I'm trying to remember which is also about a wax museum, and in that case, there's this like novel group of mystery solvers. You know, one of them.
You know, why is it? Do you think that so many horror films are set around wax museums?
Are they? I mean, I can only think of like 5 or 6. I mean,
it's practically its own subgenre. I mean, 5 or 6.
No, it totally is. Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, if you start backwards, if you start with like House of Wax in 2005, which I have not seen, but that's the one with Paris Hilton. That's all I know. There's Waxworks and Waxworks 2. And those movies rock, and we definitely should do Waxworks sometime. There's House of Wax. You mentioned
Mystery of the Wax Museum, and I know there's more than that.
Bucket of Blood.
Oh, Bucket of Blood, yeah.
But I'm trying to remember the Wax Museum one from the '60s had something called a horror horn, so that when like the guy has been thrown off of a train trestle with like a safe attached to his hand, and so he has to cut off his own hand before he drowns. And so that you don't have to be exposed to that, they do this thing called the horror horn, and it goes roar, and it fills the whole screen with red, and it's a warning that you can look away. It's the coolest thing, in the world. That was got it. Chamber of Horrors, 1966. So that's it. Those are. So we just listed, 5, certainly under 10. Yes,
but
it's
that's enough to necessitate that people don't trust people who run wax museums.
Yeah.
There's also, if you look at the history of wax museums, there's the uncanny valley thing, where they are really realistic, and so it's something like in the same way that we have movies about dolls, or especially like clown dolls and stuff like that. these kinds of effigies that look realistic enough are unsettling. And
yes.
Also, given that a lot of wax museums do actually, the whole premise of this one is, hey, why don't you make these like really terrible things, because that's what's really selling in wax museums. And he's like, no, but I have this, this, and this. And so a lot of the wax museums do have a horror element unto themselves with torture and everything. Like, look, here's what people did, and they're extremely realistic looking, tableaus. So I think all of that probably really, just by the creation of the wax museum, people went to it and went, oh, this is horrifying. We should make a movie of this because it is so horrifying. And
it's awesome. It's horrifying in kind of an awesome way. I mean, what you were just talking about with the uncanny valley of looking at these dioramas, these tableaus of all these figures doing crazy stuff, like chopping off somebody's head or torturing somebody, you look at it, and I think it gives me the same kind of thrill that I think children have when they look at a diorama in a shoebox. There's just something sort of magical about seeing this frozen bunch of people, in front of you. But think about this. If they made the diorama, but it was made up of humans in costumes, actors, like everybody in this museum as an actor has been hired, that would not be as exciting. There's something about the as you said exactly, the uncanniness of the waxworks, where that they're not real. That's what's exciting about it. This movie captures it pretty well. I mean, I think wax movies fail or succeed based really on how much time they spend showing us cool wax figures and not boring us, And in this one, this is a pretty neat wax museum that he's got. Before we go on to some of the sequences about the wax museum, I wanted to, I also want to talk about Carolyn Jones. But first, I should mention just Vincent Price and the way he behaves here. Vincent Price is, when I think of Vincent Price, name the first Vincent Price film that you can think of that when you associate a film with Vincent Price.
House on Haunted Hill.
House on Haunted Hill, Tony?
Mask of Red Death. Dr. Phibes, of course. I don't know. The Raven.
Mask of the Red Death is a good one. Joya, what was
Dr. Goldfoot.
I
would say Mask of the Red Death, and then my dad just mentioned Last Man Standing, which
No.
Last Man on Earth.
Last Man on Earth. Excellent.
Oh,
excellent.
Yeah.
No, good choice. Last Man on Earth. But for me, House of Usher, Mask of the Red Death, all that 1960s stuff, and it's so funny to think of the fact that Vincent Price lived like, a bunch of careers, and he just kept reinventing himself, and in the 50s, you have this Vincent Price who's doing a lot of they're horror, but they're still Hollywood horror, and he was in The Fly, and he's in The Tingler with William Castle.
Yeah, The Fly.
Well, but it's all these sort of Technicolor, but sort of modern. Basically, it's 50s Vincent Price, and then in the 60s, you have the Edgar Allan Poe Vincent Price. With a few exceptions. That was really where he went. Is all of that Poe stuff, and he gets reinvented. So to me, the finest Vincent Price film to me is House of Usher, and always will be.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's so striking in that role.
Yeah, not Witchfinder General, which is a lot of people's go-to. Like, this is the best Vincent Price. That's not my favorite, but I'm saying that seems to be the one that the majority of people always say to me.
Well, and it's funny that they do. Witchfinder General, I'm not knocking Witchfinder General. That's a fine film, but it's so, to me, saying that your favorite Vincent Price movie is Witchfinder General is like saying that your favorite, a Stephen King movie is, or a Stephen King novel is something that he never published, but that he put into like an essay book or something. It's like a deliberately cocktail party-ish kind of answer, because it's an independent film. It's made by, I can't remember the name of the really talented director, but it's off-brand Vincent Price.
It's not the Price persona that, we think of, and
no, for sure.
And I definitely I definitely prefer, the on-brand Vincent Price personally.
Right.
Like I like his little camp lines when he's just being the wax museum tour host. And this, that's to me is like Vincent Price. Would you ladies care for some smelling salts? Like that to me is like pure Vincent Price goodness there.
And the occasional gay vibe that Vincent Price gives off, like when he tells his attractive male assistant something, what I wouldn't give for those fingers of yours. And there's a certain sort of just, and this is something Dan Aykroyd used to play with when he did Vincent Price on SNL, was just the sort of, the kind of winking, just slightly, we all know that I'm a closeted gay man vibe that Price would give off. And it's just fascinating. He's fabulous. Okay, but anyway, this is the 50s period. By the way, there's one more, and that's the 40s and early 50s Price, which was, we played The Saint apparently, which sounds.
It's funny. We've kind of hit on almost all of these at this point, except for we haven't done a Poe movie, but we did. Invisible Man Returns. We're doing this, and we did the Fives movies. And I guess, you guys, you didn't do it with me, but you did it with Carrie. You did House on Haunted Hill.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. And so you're right that I can't believe we haven't done the Poe stuff. It's sort of bizarre, that because that stuff is so great, and I think we've just been putting it off because we just can't. It's like we can't bear to risk it. But we do need to address the Poe movies in time. But so if the listener.
But if you expect me to go through the whole retrospective without ever using puns, then you're going to be really disappointed.
You can get one pun per episode.
Because Jason likes to exasperatedly sigh at me when I use puns.
One per episode.
All right.
That's what you'll get. All right. I also want to mention, the supporting cast they're all wonderful, but I got to tell you, the ingenue and her boyfriend, I could not close my eyes and picture them for all the world. They're not necessarily familiar to me. They're not necessarily memorable to me. They're charming and beautiful. They seem to fit in perfectly with the studio system kind of picture, but playing the movie takes a sort of Dracula form where the bad guy kills first the slutty, zanier girl and then sets his sights on the nicer girl. The zanier girl... The
slutty, zanier girl is Morticia Addams.
It's yes. Oh, my gosh. I didn't recognize her. Her name is Carol.
She's a blonde. Like, why would you recognize her?
She's a blonde.
And she put on that, crazy accent, too. The really ditzy...
so bizarre. Well, she has two different accents. She has the accent that she puts on for, the rich boyfriend, where she's just, it's a very, the hi, oh my God, that whole business,
exactly.
Really? And then she's got kind of a lower, but still kind of odd, voice that she uses with her roommate or her
Which
friend.
in theory is her voice.
Yeah.
And
but it's still not Morticia Addams. Morticia Addams way deeper voice.
And that's wonderful stuff because we see her, in that case, we see the two girlfriends. They're living together. It's $18.99. They can barely afford the rooms that they're in. They're basically paying their way to live in the city and and eventually meet and marry a rich boyfriend. And, they're so poor that they're starving. And, Carolyn Jones gives her roommate, her last, coin to go get some food because neither of them is particularly eating, but she's like, I'm going on a date, so my boyfriend will pay for me. But, I did not recognize that was her, and I truly didn't recognize it was her until later when Vincent Price has used her as, has murdered Carolyn Jones and made her into Joan of Arc, and we close in on Joan of Arc's face, the wax figure, and we find that it's her. But she's in a black wig, and at that point, suddenly she looks like like Morticia Addams, and it's amazing that I was really surprised to see that this woman had any existence. I know this sounds crazy, but to me she was always Morticia Addams and not a real actress. It's like I hadn't internalized that there was actually a person there who did other movies and could be.
Oh, have you ever seen King Creole?
No. Well, see, there you go. No.
She was great in that.
The Elvis
and also,
movie, right?
Yeah, that Elvis's best movie. Like, I mean, not that that's saying a whole lot, but that's actually a really good film if you've never seen it.
That's a good tip. That's really good. Okay, there you go. You know, Elsa Lanchester was in an Elvis movie, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always funny to see all these different character actors like show up. You know, same thing with you know, all those beach party movies. They're always having random people like Buster Keaton and so forth show. Okay, so why is this movie in 1899? I mean, it looks so 50s to me. I have to remind myself it's an 1899 setting.
Well, I think that's
it's after that. It's after 1900 because they talk about that the pocket watch is inscribed.
Okay, so it must be like 1904 or something.
The odd thing about that is Mystery of the Wax Museum is contemporary. You know, it's got that weird sort of, you know, gothic, you know, like the same, you know, all horror films from the 30s had that weird sort of mishmash of trying to be gaslight and you know, gothic yet contemporary, and it's very much got that same kind of quality to it. You know, by the time this came out, I think if you're just going to tell this kind of story, like that was the rule. You know, like when people thought like, oh, we're going to do a horror film, there's going to be a disfigured guy, and he's going to wear a cloak, and there's going to be a lot of fog, and that's just like, that's what this kind of horror film was. And, you know, like, I'm pretty sure they probably never even thought to make it contemporary because, you know, if you were going to do gothic horror, you didn't set it
gothic,
contemporary. Yeah.
Wow, that's thank you, Drew. That's really wonderful. You've given me a lot to think about because that has to be true. You know, because I remember Price said in an interview something like, you know, an actor like me, the only real place that we have work is in costume dramas. And so I guess you're right. It's like if it's this kind of movie, then it's going to take place in the past. That's sort of funny. And also, I guess, go ahead.
What's interesting about it, though, you talk about the 50s-ness of it, and that's one of the things that I like about it. Is again, you know, we talked about this when we talked about, you know, the version of the 20s that's in the Fives films. This is an idea of what that time period would be like. It's not like trying to be realistic. It's got this certain look to it, and I really like that. Like I'm not somebody that needs like the painstaking period accuracy. In fact, I almost enjoy the interpretation better.
Absolutely, because movies are not really supposed to be real. Movies are supposed to make us feel things, you know. So it doesn't matter to me. I like Braveheart a lot, but it doesn't matter to me really whether Braveheart is a truly true vision of what William Wallace was like and what his battles were like, or if it's as ridiculously Hollywood as that old, you know, an old. I don't know, I keep mentioning the biography of Thomas Edison starring Spencer Tracy, which is just completely made up. They're both false. They're both just works of art intended to make us, you know, react and think of things. I think this movie probably serves no purpose whatsoever except to be beautiful and give us some thrills and then go away. I mean, there's no attempt it's not a movie that's attempting to make us think on any deeper level than what it appears. I mean, unless there's.
I think you can kind of get into the psychology of Price's character, and certainly if this was made a decade or so later, there would be much more made about, like, you know, because he's very much not. He's a terrible criminal, you know, like. Five, we talked a lot about how Fives is just this unstoppable criminal genius. This character is the reverse of this. I don't think he cares whether or not he gets.
I can make it deep. I can make it deep. I mean, the fact is, he was a hopeful, you know, optimistic, kind person who wanted to just make beautiful art, and he didn't want to have it be. He didn't want to give in to the whole idea that he had to have, you know, a macabre part of the museum to be able to attract people. He didn't care about that. It was all about the art and the beauty and sharing, you know, his gift. And then this horrible, evil person comes along and takes everything from him, takes everything he loves, and kills the goodness in him. And then he's like, well, then that's it. So I mean, I think that's the depth. Is that what does it take? What does it take to kill the goodness in someone? To kill that willingness to share? And are we all capable of becoming horrible people when everything is taken from us? That's my deep.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, even I doubt the filmmakers intended it, but I mean, you can look at the shattering of his handsome face, and the reveal of the monstrous face. Under that is kind of an underpining of exactly what you're talking about. Like, this is a guy whose spirit has been crushed, and he does essentially die in that fire, and what comes back is deranged and sad, and more than a little bit sad.
Well, there is sad. You're right. You're absolutely right. I should take back what I said, because there is sadness to it. There's some gentleness that he has with his the fact that he takes on these apprentices, and he seems to be actually teaching them to do the work, and that some of them are really wounded people. One is a deep drunk, and one is this incredible mute named Igor, played by Charles Bronson, who seems to also be really, in the end, a kind of a gentle person. The only person who's killing people left and right is Vincent Price, who sneaks out at night and does he kill Carolyn Jones because he wants her face? Is that the deal? I don't remember why. Yeah,
he kills her because he's inspired by her to be Joan of Arc.
That's crazy. Now that's some crazy stuff. Whereas killing the other guy, was revenge. You could. That's not crazy. That's just immoral. But in this case, I see Carolyn Jones's face. I think she'll make a great Joan of Arc. I'm going to kill her. This other girl, I've seen her face. She's going to make a great Marie Antoinette. I'm going to kill her too. Now he's turning into a nutso serial killer. You're right. It's funny that he veers from a kind of a sadness to this amazing. Well,
that's the double-edgedness of this character, though. You're talking about how he's kind of taking in these societal misfits, and there's a charitable kind of almost admirable quality about that. But you also think he's probably also taken in these guys because he thinks they're easier to manipulate. And obviously with the alcoholic, he's extremely easy to manipulate because the cops, basically bribe him with booze to give a confession later in the movie. So,
no, that's right. Oh, and by the way, Dab Greer showing up as one of the cops. This is the guy who I think I know him mainly from Little House on the Prairie, which I would watch when I was a kid. But he's one of the more countrified detectives, who has a southern accent. That guy used to be on TV programs just literally all the time. He played judges, he played cops, he played, doctors, and very reliable. It's kind of neat to see him here. In a way, this also reminded me of some of the sort of lightweight comedies that you'd get in the 1960s, even like The Ghost of Mr. Chicken, with Don Knotts, where all these different characters show up, and all the sets appear to be like really, really nice-looking television sets, basically.
Except I don't feel like the jokiness of there's a jokiness to this, but I feel like the tone of this movie, because like I said, like the way he murders, his old partner is extremely gruesome.
No, that's
and right. Then when later on when Igor and the boyfriend are getting into a fist fight, you have by the time they're done with that fight, like Charles Bronson's face looks like he's got blood coming out of his nose.
No, that's true.
This is true.
And I would never suggest this was pure comedy. Not at all. Not at all. I like the level of comedy. If it sounds like I'm coming down hard in this movie, I'm not intending to at all. I mean, I actually really very much enjoyed this. So, okay, so we talked about time period. We talked about Hollywood horror. and 3D. We talked about Vincent Price. One thing that I thought was really interesting was just the pacing of this movie. That it's like it clips along. It's probably like, what is it, like 87 minutes long or something, or 90? I mean, it's you think of I get the impression that movies are getting a lot longer now. That if this movie came out today, it would probably clock in at nearly 2 hours long. We'd probably have several more character sequences and explanations of what's going on with Vincent Price. But the movies at this time, they're just they just move and then and then they're done. And it was just part of the way that you ran a feature presentation. You'd have a 90-minute feature and then also a couple little shorts and stuff like that. So I was really impressed with them. Let's see, what else?
I didn't know that they're that much longer, though, because I'm looking at, I just picked one randomly. I picked Carrie, 2013. That's 100 minutes to the 88 minutes that House of Wax is. I think it just depends. I think there are longer movies now, but I don't think they're.
Am I wrong? I mean, it could be that I'm wrong, but to me,
there's certainly a lot of movies that are attempting to be quote unquote epic since Lord of the Rings.
But there always have been. I mean, Gone with the Wind was like 15,000 hours.
This movie is like 90 minutes long and has an intermission. I mean, that's amazing.
That was kind of funny.
That's amazing.
The fact that they kept that on the
That's for people to go get their concessions.
Yeah, but I mean, I get that maybe it's not the length, maybe it's the pacing. This movie, to some extent, to the extent that it feels like a confection, like Kiss Me Kate or something like that, because of that beautiful color, that nevertheless, this movie just clips along so fast it's over before you feel like it just spent no time at all.
Okay, so I'm looking at the Wikipedia and it says average length of feature films increased from around 90 minutes in 1931 to almost 120 minutes in 1960. So they did go up, but I don't know that they've gone up in the last bunch of years. I think it's more that they went up at that time.
Well, I would need to look at the movies of the past year. Pick the movies that are nominated for the Oscar and get the average time for each of those, and we would start to get our answer as to where movies typically. Well,
and you also got to look though. You have to compare apples to apples. You have to look at horror movies, not just any movie.
No, that's a really good point. You know what? That's a research we definitely are going to need to take and look into before we're back, and we can report on it next week. So the movie ends. I should mention the film ends with this really great sequence in the Wax Museum, and we get a chance to look at it because they've invented the Wax Museum that Vincent Price has, and he's connived to have the young lady who is the lead to come and be there by herself because he sends her boyfriend off to do an errand for him. So the young lady comes. This is the one whose face he wants for Marie Antoinette, and she comes by herself, and he kind of chases her around the entire Wax Museum. And
it's a very scary scene. I mean,
yes.
It's in the dark. It's already a scary place anyway, and then he just manages to
She's
just kind of knock
him.
things that are hanging from the ceiling, so that things are constantly swinging around, and it's really
well.
great.
You get a feel for how big this place is.
Yeah.
It's an enormous. It has all these different tableaus, and there's something very skillful about the way the director works because by that time you've seen these before, and you've seen Vincent Price walk us through the museum, so you really get a feel for the physical space, like where everything is in relation to everything else. This is the Bluebeard place, and this is the place where they're doing the torture chamber and whatever, and you get a feel for how far she is from one thing after another. And it's probably all fake, by the way, because sets don't actually work like that. Usually you just build more or less the part that you're filming, and then you just pretend that they're connected. It's very good. I mean, I was really impressed with this final sequence. And did anybody else? I mean, I also felt a great deal of suspense in that final bit. Where once he captures her.
Well, I mean, the idea of. Sorry, Tony, first.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tony. We haven't heard from you.
Oh yeah. I mean, plus, and it does have I would say a lot of people who may be intrigued, because there's a whole, something awful has taught me in just perusing the internet, there's a whole thing for damsels in distress. And so I think for people who like damsels in distress, this has a whole sequence devoted to just exactly what they like. Oh, my goodness, she's going to get waxed, figuratively and literally.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
But, like, that whole sequence really is the, you know, girl on the tracks, like all of that stuff, but it's also really suspenseful. And it's also funny, too, because in general, her boyfriend's kind of like, you know, at first I was like, where is this going? Because, you know, when you see him before, they're in a, you know, at a cabaret, and he's like, yeah, you know, you're worried about some stuff, but hey, watch the dancing girls. That's why we're here.
God.
Oh my gosh, that was
like, and you're just what a, really, dude? Like, he's like, yeah, you know, wow, that stuff sounds intriguing. But, you know, girls are dancing in front of us, so
oh
just
my
hold
God.
up.
Yes, he takes her to. She's had this freaky experience where her girlfriend, her roommate, was murdered in their bedroom,
and she found her.
And now she's run to her boyfriend, and he goes,
by the
"Hey, let's go watch the Can and drink our port wine." And she's like, "Is this a respectful place?" And he's like, "Sure."
Yeah, I think the
way,
fact that they had Can Girls, again, that was purely in there because they had 3D. It's like, let's get a bunch of girls dancing in a row so they can kick.
It's a great sequence, but it's just, I was just kind of laughing at it, just kind of what a jerk that guy was.
But, you know, yeah, but I think that's actually not unrealistic. Because honestly, I mean, what if your spouse was, like, horrible trauma, would you rather have her just sit and cry for hours, or would you rather be like, let's go do something fun and get your mind off of it?
Would you take her to a strip club?
Would you take her to a strip
club?
club?
It's not a strip club. It's a dance. It's a dance
of
show.
The time?
Right.
Like,
yes,
of course, it's a cabaret show full of women.
I don't know. I can see that. I think it's different from a strip. I think it's more. It'd be more like saying, you know, let's go. I don't know. It's because every show has sexy women. You know, like if you look at turn on any given show on like Univision, like they all have the women who are scantily clad, and you could totally see you taking your wife if you're like in that culture. It's like going to one of those shows.
If you're also if you're gonna pay attention to the women on stage as opposed to your wife who's just or girlfriend who's just had trauma, is that? I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, I like the debate, but I think it's
model. I'm not saying he's the model boyfriend. I'm just saying that I kind of see it or whatever. I think you're right though. That
and Julia's
defense. They had a troupe. They probably had a
so next time something traumatic happens, suggest a burlesque show. Don't listen to Julia.
And Julia's defense.
And then pay attention directly to the stage. Like, just, I'm really upset by this. That's great, Julia. Watch the dancers. They are hot. Check this out.
And Julia's defense,
I don't think
not like
your marriage is going to be quite the same.
Like your entertainment options were more limited.
I'm just saying I would rather see a live show, not necessarily like I'm not talking about anything more risque than that. Than I would sit in my room and plus it's a public place, so there's lots of people. It's probably going to feel safer. I don't know, whatever. Anyway,
but back
to
the thing about his reaction more than where they're at.
I know.
Well, his direction is just like it's the same thing that they do in Austin Powers when they're riding through the bus, and they're having their sort of lovey-dovey date, and then he turns to the camera and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, Burt Bacharach," and then
sure. And now we have our musical interlude, exactly.
Yeah.
But I want to say about the thing at the end, though, when she gets waxed figuratively and literally, or about to be. That's another one where it's exactly like Fives, because that's exactly what happens with Fives, where he's got the kid and he's gonna like drop all the whatever. In this case, it was poison. In this case, it's wax.
Oh my God!
On the kid, and then somebody dramatically, pushes him out of the way at the last second. And in this case, nobody gets the wax doesn't fall on anyone, but Vincent Price falls into the wax. So it's very similar in that.
No, you're absolutely
Definitely.
right. Yeah, and she's and there's also something titillating about the fact that they make a big deal about the fact that she's been stripped naked and she's laying in this sort of coffin box underneath. And they've walked us through this incredible process where they take the hard center of a dummy
feel about that?
It's crazy. I mean, it's true.
And I love the fact that he's like talking to her like he's the tour guide again. Like, I'll walk you through the process in a moment. You know, it just goes to show you how off his rocker this guy is.
Yeah. And it's again, it's so strange to me that this is where Vincent Price was up to in this period in 1953. You know, because the post-up hasn't happened yet. So if we're friends, right, and it's 1953, and I've met you after whatever the hell job I would manage to have in 1953, and I've said, hey, there's a new Vincent Price movie, what does that mean to us? Does it mean, oh, yeah, he does the best horror films? Or what, you know, is this in keeping with the nuttiness that we'll see later? I wish I could get rid of
this is kind of the start of Vincent Price horror movie star. I mean, like, I'm not saying like this is, but I mean, this is what where like you're seeing like his, because you know he'd done genre stuff before, because you know again we did The Invisible Man, which is you know a decade or so before this, but you know I think for a movie star to be associated heavily with one particular genre, they have to do a succession of films that are successful in said genre. Like if, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger had come out in The Terminator and The Terminator just did okay, he probably wouldn't be who we think of. And I mean, if anybody is the Arnold Schwarzenegger, is to horror what Arnold Schwarzenegger is to action, I would say it's Vincent Price. I mean, he's the household name horror movie star. Like, I can name people. If you were to grab 5 people and say, okay, name somebody that you know is a famous horror movie star. I think 2 out of 3 of them, or maybe even 3 out of 5, would probably say Vincent Price.
I think that's fair. I guess you're right. So yeah, and this is the beginning, because we know it's not the Return of the Invisible Man that does it. The part that he has in The Fly is not big enough. That's a straight man role. These hammy bad guy roles, yeah, they really do sort of start around here. And in The Tingler, you know, but remember in House of Wax, he's just a conniving husband. But The Tingler is a good example. And it's what we're witnessing, the beginning of something truly great here. And boy, is he good. I mean, he's firing on all cylinders. There's you know, he doesn't miss a step as being the Vincent Price that we know he'll be. This does make me want to do that 60s retrospective. We will get to it soon. I promise you. I'll bet we'll get to it this year. So, all right. And that about gets us as much time as we can manage. So let's go around and get our final thoughts on the House of Wax, and then do some endorsements. And if there's something that I didn't touch on, then please remind me. Okay. And in fact, well, you know what? Let's mix it up and do the reverse, because we heard less. Tony, what are your final thoughts on House of Wax?
Well, like I said, it doesn't speak to me, I think, in the same way that does Drew. I think there's some great sequences, again, like, and it is beautifully filmed. Like, I love how colorful everything is. I think there's also some fantastic art direction, and the wax figures look great. The molds that they're doing when they're, like, there's that one kind of almost demonstration where they're, like, molding the face and, make it look more tortured and everything like that. All that stuff is really great. It's fairly suspenseful, but I wish I knew exactly why it didn't just, like, blow me away. I don't know. Maybe it's just been a weird week. But I definitely like it. It's just, it's not my favorite Vincent Price, but it is a lot of fun. It's well worth checking out, especially if you haven't seen it before. Like, this really does belong in one of the, like, you should check this out. It's good in that respect. I do wish I had seen it in 3D, though. That's really cool. If I ever get a chance to, I would definitely do that to mix it up, because I think that would enhance the coolness factor by a fair amount, in a way that, like, maybe modern films, because they expect it to be this cool blockbuster, whereas kind of a lot of these older films, there's a certain charm to the, like, hey, everybody, let's throw some stuff at you. It's 3D.
Yes. That's right.
And for some reason, this one also isn't even as ham-fisted as like the 80s, sci-fi ones like Jared Sin and Metal Storm and all that, where they're kind of, I don't know, it seemed to not quite get it in the same kind of way. So, so for me, it's cool, but it's not as cool as maybe some other Price films that I enjoy more.
Very cool. Thank you. Julia, final thoughts?
Well, I do think that they did the 3D thing a little bit, like I was saying before, that a little overdid it with the ping pong guy. There's a guy with a ping pong paddle, and he's just like hitting the ball out to the audience. And he actually talks to the audience at one point. He's like, "It's going in your popcorn bag," or whatever. It's like, okay, this part was a little too cheesy. But anyway, I guess I would want to point out the just trivia a bit here. I found the scene. There's a guillotine in the set, and I found the scene where the guy, the boyfriend Paul, I don't know what his name is in the movie, but the actual name is Paul. He is put into guillotine, unconscious, and he's going to be killed. And then these cops come along and they rescue him, and they pull him out, and right then the guillotine drops. And that whole thing was really scary because they actually they were going to use a real. They had a real guillotine blade, and the actor protested and said, "No, I'm not doing this," because he was going to actually do it. And he's like, "It's too dangerous," because the prop man was going to hold the blade off camera and then just tell the actors when he dropped it so they could pull the guy out. This is so preposterous. So he got thrown out of the movie set, off the movie. But then the studio said, "No, you need to bring him back," and so they changed it to be a little less dangerous, but he was like, "Okay, I'll do one take," and that's it. So they just did the one take, which I thought was really interesting. But it adds so much to just how scary the whole thing is. And then the other interesting little tidbit is that the guy who plays the alcoholic guy, Leon, his name is Nedrick Young, and he was uncredited because he had actually been blacklisted during the McCarthy Red Scare. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, just to think about the context in which they're making this film, in all these films. I mean, when all this crazy stuff is going on politically, not that it's not always going on, but
no, but that's true. Yeah. We think of these people as being very innocent or living in a more innocent time, and yet, it's important to remember that in 1953 there are actors who are being put out of work and whose families can't be fed because some crazy politician thinks there is a communist, and Europe is still being rebuilt after World War II. The Korean War is starting. All these things are happening. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
But other than that, I just really liked it. I thought it was fun.
So very cool. Drew, I'd love to hear your final thoughts.
I think I said this probably more eloquently than I did the last night. People often ask what horror films should I watch from the last few years, and I'm going to repeat something I said a few weeks back. If you have not seen this movie and you're a horror movie fan, there's something kind of lacking in your education, and you really should go back and check this out. And it is what's fun about that in the context of what we have been doing the last several weeks is that you can kind of piece the puzzles. It's like, we've been talking about Dr. Fives, and I honestly, legitimately believe if there hadn't been a House of Wax, there probably never would have been a Dr. Fives, because I feel like the two movies are very linked in that way. And I think when you get to be a studious, not just like a casual genre fan, but a studious genre fan, I think that becomes more of an enriching experience. And I guess in a nutshell what I'm saying is I think not only has this movie got tremendous entertainment value, but I mean, if you're looking at Price's career, this is definitely an important role and an important movie. So you should give yourself a chance to really take this movie in and think about it.
That's really wonderful. That was delightful. I couldn't add anything to that, other than just to say I absolutely agree. It's it's a short film, so this is one where if you want to fill out your horror awareness with a real classic, you could queue up something truly amazing from recent years. You could go get The Babadook or whatever, and then have this right before as just a really great gem of horror from a previous era. You certainly will not be bored. This is not a boring movie. It's a snappy, beautiful looking picture, and I was very pleased to watch it. Let's get endorsements. I'm really curious what you guys have been reading or watching recently or into. Tony, anything you want to endorse for us this week?
Actually, Shout Factory put up their Roku channel, and that's been really cool. They have a lot of ads, and the ads, I say that, but you can get most things for really cheap if you just want to rent it without ads. So, if you're a freeloader these days, then you can, the ads are a cool thing. They do tend to be kind of long, but there's tons of Mystery Science Theater, and of course, Shout Factory also does their Scream Factory stuff, some of the best DVDs of horror movies and such. Right now,
I can't believe it's free, but it is.
Yeah,
it's
cool. There's good stuff up there, and although it does also, I now know why. I'm like, why do they keep taking all the Mystery Science Theater off of Amazon Prime and Netflix? And here's why. But it's really cool. I think I'm hoping they expand even more because they have a pretty nice roster of stuff, and I hope that there's more of that. But for the beginning of a channel, the Shout Factory channel is pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of it. I'm definitely the commercials though. They have very few different commercials, so the variety is lacking. So I hope you're either going to want to go out and buy or absolutely hate the Nissan Murano by the time that you've watched enough Shout Factory TV. But man, I will have to say that commercial that they do show is some A-level Don Draper stuff, targeted very much at a demographic where I'm like, wow, that is great if you're that demographic, but I am so sick of seeing this commercial.
Wow.
But it is a really great channel, and again, I'm complaining about that, but I'm getting to watch all this stuff for free, so I really don't have a leg to stand on. I think it's great that they're making this channel, and I'm looking forward to having it expand. I hope it takes off. I hope it continues to be a staple of Roku because it's pretty cool.
You don't even, I know you're a big proponent of Roku, and you certainly have Roku, but I don't, and yet Shout Factory TV, which just premiered this week, sounds like we're sponsored by Shout Factory TV, and I promise that we are not sponsored by Shout Factory TV, although we would be if Shout Factory TV were.
Yeah, well, Scream Factory does, when I go looking for, horror DVD, Shout's putting out the stuff. And as far as TV, which we all enjoy, talked about, it's quality, man. You can go to Shout. I know, I don't mind chilling for them or talking about them because, if you're going to go get something, they're one of the publishers that's, doing good stuff. So. Well,
this new that new program you just talked about, Shout Factory TV, so-called, just got released last week. It's free. You can get it online. You can get it on your Chrome, on iPad. It's I'm amazed. And yeah, that's where all the MST3K stuff is. So neat stuff. Thank you for mentioning that, because yes, that was the biggest news in Groovy fandom, short of the Spider-Man news that happened in the past week. Drew, do you have anything to endorse for us?
Well, yeah, during the break, I was given from multiple people for Christmas the IDW Ghostbusters comic. I was given the first 4 paperbacks of that. It's written by Eric Burnham And Dan, I'm going to butcher this guy's last name, and off the chance that he hears it, I apologize in advance. Dan Schoening, I think, or Schoening, does the art. And it is, if you're a fan of the Ghostbusters movies and the Ghostbusters cartoon, like they are pitch perfect. Like the dialogue is they just nail the voices of all the characters, and the art has this great way of sort of bridging the style of the films with the style of the old cartoon series. And I just you know, I have to say, like, a lot of licensed comic books, I don't tend to enjoy them. You know, so I was a little skeptical about this series initially, but I really enjoy it. I can't wait to get the rest of the paperbacks, and you know, we're not going to probably ever see a proper. It's impossible now to see a continuation of Ghostbusters that all of the fans would like to see. But this is pretty close. You know, it references everything, like I said, from the old cartoon series to both of the films to the video game. You know, it's all that stuff is in there. And if Ghostbusters is really near and dear to your heart, like, this is the next best thing you're going to get to a continuation of, like, a Ghost. This is the next best thing you're going to get to a Ghostbusters 3.
Yes, I've seen it several times. I haven't read my way through it, but I've heard that it's just wonderful. And IDW does, you know, if you're looking at I mean, you know, tie-in comics, IDW does some of the best. Although, by the way, Marvel is now doing the tie-in Star Wars stuff, and it's looking pretty good. I love the alternate covers that they just showed for Princess Leia.
Marvel, you know, I have to say, I know a lot of people are skeptical about it, but like Marvel's had some interesting stuff, like the covers that Alex Ross is doing for the new Secret Wars are just gorgeous.
I haven't seen them. All right, Julia, do you have anything to endorse?
Well, today I'm really sad because Jon Stewart announced that he's retiring from The Daily Show. So I'm going to go with endorsing Brian Williams to take over The Daily Show. That's my endorsement.
Is that a meme? Are people talking about this, or are you setting something now?
Yes, it's a thing.
Okay.
Because why not, you know? At this point.
Absolutely.
You may as well do fake news.
Yeah. Okay. All right. You endorsed the fake news. Brian Williams, come roaring back as the star of The Daily Show. All right. And my endorsement, actually, outside of Shout Factory TV, which man, what a great one. By the way, they have Father Knows Best, which my 9-year-old is now obsessed with, because she listens to radio shows when she goes to sleep at night. So she's started listening to Father Knows Best like every night. And I'll go down there in the middle of the night to turn off like lights and stuff that are left on, and I can hear voices in her room, and I go in and she's asleep, but she'll be playing like just back-to-back episodes of Father Knows Best, you know, and I get
Man, you know, when you guys decided to have kids, and I remember telling Jason, your kids are either going to end up like you guys, and it's going to be like things like listening to this stuff like to go to sleep, as opposed to like pop or whatever else, or they're going to be like, oh, my dad and his silly comic books, and oh, I can't believe he likes this stuff. I'm glad it turned out the way it did, but I find it freaking hilarious that, like, you tell these stories, and I'm like, yes, and I get a postcard, and it's all Doctor Who, and because it's going to go, like, there's no way, there's no in-between, there's no, like, it's, the way it turned out, I think it's awesome. We're going to have geek kids,
and we're going to have, like, popular kids, yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm glad it happened, because the way it usually happens is, stupid, like, why does he even like sci-fi?
Yeah.
And it's really cool, like, hey, let's all watch Justice League and etc. I think that's pretty awesome.
That's very sweet of you.
These stories really, I feel a little bit better for the next generation. Like, I feel a little safer. Like, maybe things will be all right. Maybe.
Well, thank you. I hope so. So we've been, for one thing, I've been making a lot of use of the Internet Archive, archive.org, where you can download lots of like classic radio stations for free and just load up your various iDevices with it.
You should show them the Internet Archive of DOS games if you really want to blow their minds of like, this is the way games used to look, kids. Like,
yes.
Here's Lemonade Stand and Oregon Trail and just all kinds of CD games.
I had a DOS game where on my 8088 where you controlled this like plumb bob shaped craft that is falling straight down through a shaft, and you control left and right to try to.
Oh yeah, you should look it up, dude. Like, that's one cool thing about Internet Archive. They just recently released like tons of DOS games, hot on the heels of releasing tons of arcade games, which you can play in a browser, which is awesome. Yeah,
wow.
It's fantastic. Like, the Internet Archive, super cool lately, especially. Like, it was already cool, but now that I can play like old DOS games, in fact I've had to I've been doing a lot more band stuff, and so I've had to cut down on some of that. But if I didn't have tons of stuff to do at Rooster Teeth and with music, that would be it's easy to go down that rabbit hole like in a big way. Oof, it's dangerous, but it's also really, really cool.
Yeah, I will check that out. So archive.org, and I just wanted to mention I read Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King, which is his newish one. I don't think it's his most recent one, but it's a very, very recent Stephen King book. And it's one of the first ones I ever read that by Stephen King, I mean with a few differences here and there, but where there's no supernatural element at all. It's just a pure murder mystery, catch a serial killer cop thriller. And he does a good job. It's like Stephen King decided that he was going to write, a Patricia Cornwell novel. Good stuff. And so I very much recommend it. That went well. So and I'm also right now I'm reading The Birds by Daphne du Maurier, but I'm not going to talk about it yet. I will talk about it next week because it's very different, and we did an episode on The Birds, so it'll be fun to discuss. So, gosh. That's been a lot of fun. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for our discussion of House of Wax. If you are coming in from Bleeding Cool, we are so happy that you're here. If you found us through Stitcher or iTunes or through the Facebook page or whatever, we love to hear from you, and we're glad you're here, and we want to see your reviews. We have so many great reviews on iTunes, but we always want more. It helps people find the show. Come to the Facebook page, argue with us, tell us that we need to be more organized, or tell us that we're completely wrong. We will engage you, and we love that stuff. So thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic week, and I will talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.